right, so this is what we're going to do. Just understanding and supporting re-entering citizens. Some of those citizens may still be locked up, still incarcerated, or as a lot of us call it, still down. And what we'll do by the time we're done, I'm hoping, is that we should be able to talk about several consequences of a failed re-entry effort. We should talk about 4 challenges in bringing Matt into jails or prisons. And we're not going to specifically dive into medication-assisted treatment. I don't want to do that. That's a training in and of itself. But I think what will become real clear as we get through today's training is that one of the most important pieces we can do for folks who particularly are re-entering is making sure that they have access immediate at the gate to the medications that are going to be critical in helping facilitate successful re-entry. That may be everything from mental health meds to medication-assisted treatment, including methadone and buprenorphine. But again, it is really about getting the medication protocols accepted into jails and prisons. And we're making good progress there. We should be able to identify some best practices when we're talking about introducing programs into jails and prison. We should be able to talk a little bit about stigma and bias, definitely explain post-incarceration syndrome, 6 barriers or more to successful reentry. Sorry for this giant list of objectives. You can figure you'll probably remember about 3 of them by the time you're done. But I'm really hoping that we can leave this information with all of you and you can go back over it, at your own leisure. We should be able to talk a little bit about the subcultures of addiction. Not a whole lot yet, but certainly we're going to be talking about that as we move forward into this week as well. We should be able to talk about the importance of social capital and the rationale for harm reduction. And then we should be able to talk a little bit about the difference between drug court versus a traditional court and why that matters. We're going to dive deeper into that on the Wednesday session as well. And then finally, the 2 reasons drug courts are effective alternatives to traditional courts. And I'm not sure that, the last 2 bullets are probably very similar. So, and everybody that's just popping into the chat, thank you for doing that. I appreciate everybody introducing themselves just checking the messages again. Use this chat as you see fit. There's all kinds of opportunities to share, and we really encourage that. Both Daryl and I will respond when we can in the chat. And if the question or the comment is, something we want the whole group to share, then we'll make that occur as well. All right, that gets us through the learning objectives and the housekeeping stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this over to Daryl. Daryl's going to take us through all the way up to some trauma information, and then we're going to do a little talking head switch and keep carrying on. So with that, Daryl, let me get you to Jay-Z, and you just let me know when you're ready to play this video.
Oh man, I'm ready, man. Y'all ready? Before we get started, and I don't know if you've seen me present before, but if you haven't, I present a little bit different. I like to get excited. I like to make sure we got interaction in the room. So you use your thumbs, your emojis, whatever it is. I like emojis. I like hearts. I like everything. So let me know that my screen is not frozen. So let us know you in the room. I see you, Toby. I see you, Brenda, stretching. And I see you in the room. Bethany, I see you. Let me see y'all. Let us know that you in here and you listen to us, because we want to make sure that this message get out there, because there's so many brothers and sisters that are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, struggling, and they need you to have this information. And this is a we thing, so we doing this together. So ready, brother? Let's get that video started. Let's crank that Jay-Z up, man. Get me warmed up, man. I'm ready. If you guys are ready, give us some hearts and some emojis and let us know you're ready. Let's go.
In 1986, when I was coming of age, Ronald Reagan doubled down on the war on drugs that had been started by Richard Nixon in 1971. Drugs were bad, fried your brain. And drug dealers were monsters, the sole reason neighborhoods and major cities were failing. No one wanted to talk about Reaganomics and the ending of social safety nets, the defunding of schools and the loss of jobs in cities across America. Young men like me who hustled became the sole villain, and drug addicts lacked moral fortitude. In the 1990s, incarceration rates in the US blew up. Today we imprison more people than any other country in the world. China, Russia, Iran, Cuba. All countries we consider autocratic and repressive. Yeah, more than them. Judges' hands were tied by tough on crime laws, and they were forced to hand out mandatory life sentences for simple possession and low-level drug sales. My home state of New York started this with Rockefeller laws. Then the feds made distinctions between people who sold powder cocaine and crack cocaine, even though they were the same drug. Only difference is how you take it. And even though white people used and sold crack more than black people, somehow it was black people who went to prison. The media ignored actual data to this day. Crack is still talked about as a black problem. The NYPD raided our Brooklyn neighborhoods while Manhattan bankers openly used coke with impunity. The war on drugs exploded the U.S. prison population, disproportionately locking away black and Latinos. Our prison population grew more than 900%. When the war on drugs began in 1971, our prison population was 200,000. Today it is over 2 million. Long after the crack era ended, we continued our war on drugs. There were more than 1.5 million drug arrests in 2014. More than 80% were for possession only. Almost half were for marijuana. People are finally talking about treating addiction to harder drugs as a health crisis, but there's no compassionate language about drug dealers. Unless, of course, we're talking about places like Colorado, whose state economy got a huge boost by the above-ground marijuana industry. A few states south in Louisiana, they're still handing out mandatory sentences for people who sell weed. Despite a booming and celebrated 50 billion legal marijuana industry, most states still disproportionately hand out mandatory sentences to black and Latinos with drug cases. If you're entrepreneurial and live in one of the many states that are passing legalized laws, you may still face barriers participating in the above-ground economy. Venture capitalists migrate to these states to open multi-billion-dollar operations, but former felons can't open a dispensary. Lots of times those felonies were drug charges, caught by poor people who sold drugs for a living, but are now prohibited from participating in one of the fastest growing economies. Got it? In states like New York, where holding marijuana is no longer grounds for arrest, police issue possession citations in black and Latino neighborhoods at a far higher rate than other neighborhoods. Kids in Crown Heights are constantly stopped and ticketed for trees. Kids at dorms in Columbia, where rates of marijuana use are equal to or worse than those in the hood, are never targeted or ticketed. Rates of drug use are as high as they were when Nixon declared this so-called war in 1971. 45 years later, it's time to rethink our policies and laws. The war on drugs is an epic fail.
Ouch. D, you're on mute.
I was muted. I was like, bro, you was gonna say something? Oh, thank you for that. And by show of hands, how many people found something new? Just in listening to that video, we'll make sure that we share the link with you and that you heard it. I see some hands up, like finding out, hearing things new, right? Understanding, because one of the things that I always say, you don't gotta be from the hood to work with people from the hood, but if you're gonna work with me, if you're gonna work with people that look like me, today I might not be dressed like I'm from the hood. Unfortunately, I wanna make sure that I acknowledge this today, and this is why this work is so important. I just came from a funeral from a person who served 20 years, got out after he had got a sentence modification. He knocked off 60 years off of his sentence and got out after serving 20. Been home, got married, got the car, got everything, and still committed suicide. See, this work is important, my friends. This work is important because no matter what, you get the release date. You can release somebody from prison, but we need to, and what we hope to do through these trainings and through these webinars is that it's not only about the release date. When you're working with people, it's about how do we equip them from coming home and helping them reestablish themselves within their communities, within their families, right? Because it's overwhelming. Imagine doing 20 years. Just take a second to think about having done 20 years where everything is structured. You know what time chow is. You know what time you just put your clothes out. Somebody comes and picks it up. Everything is structured. And then all of a sudden you're released tomorrow. And now you have to do, and you have to figure out everything on its own. You know, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I see the federal prison and it reminds me of my brother who did 14 years, came home, and he went to, he was out with his wife and they stopped on the highway for him to use the bathroom. And he went to wash his hands and he couldn't get the water to come out the sink because see, everybody else were washing their hands. And then he got in the car and he cried. And his wife said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "I've been gone so long, I can't even wash my hands." See, this work is important, my friends. This work is important. We didn't come to play no games, right? It said it even in the video, and we need to acknowledge the fact that America locks up more people than any other country in the world. We are very successful with locking people up, but reentry and bringing them home has been a challenge. And then I always say this, no matter what space I'm in, if you meet someone who is transitioning out, or they tell you they just came home, I need you to do me a favor. And I need you to say, "Welcome home." I need you to say, "Welcome home." See, because society, right, says all these negative things. There's all these negative connotations about being a formerly incarcerated person, like myself and my brother Stephen, right? They say that, you know, that we're like the throwaways, we're forgotten about, but these are the people, right? One of the most humanistic things you could say to somebody when they return is "Welcome home," because everybody's going to tell, "I hope you learned your lesson. I hope you don't go back. What did you learn in there?" But if you say "Welcome home," that's a game changer. And I encourage each and every one of you that can hear this, that's watching this webinar, make sure you say "Welcome home." I don't care if they've been home a year. I seen a brother today at the funeral. He said, "Man, I've been home a year." I said, "You know what I said to him? Welcome home." Man, I'm getting started. They got me started, Stephen, man. So we got this, we're looking at this federal, if you look at the US federal population here, right? If you look at this chart, and it went from, like, you see where from 1925 to 2021, and it's interesting. A lot of people talk about mass incarceration, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Interesting enough, did you know, this is a fun fact, right? If you release everybody from the federal prison system, everybody went home today, we'd still have mass incarceration. We'd still have mass incarceration. It's not the federal system, it's the state system. And the state systems, and every state has its own rules and does things a little different, you know. And I don't know if you guys, I'm from Connecticut, so I can play my music loud in this city, but if I go one city over, that's a whole different story. That might be something different, and you guys know how that plays out. So it happens like that in states to states. You know, I love to hear what states you guys from. So I like to keep Isabel busy. I don't know if y'all saw her introduce herself in the chat, but you know, she loves when you guys pop in the chat. So throw a state you from in the chat, so Isabel know where you at. Let's go to the next slide, brother. Let's keep popping. Let's go.
You're on it.
Right. So when you look at mass incarceration, and we've talked about, I see Jersey, I see Maine, I see Wisconsin, I see Washington, Alabama, Texas, Washington State. Man, Texas is in the building. Tennessee, Texas, man. I think we need to get out to Texas. Invite us to Texas. I like barbecue. Alaska, a little cold for me. Missouri, California. I was just in California. I actually went to, did I tell you, Stephen? I went to Alcatraz. That's another conversation, man. I just went to Alcatraz, first time there. Gotta go back. They did let me out. Arizona, Maine, Karen from Canada. Love Canada. Mass. I got my friends in Mass, and I also seen some friends from Vermont. I do a lot of stuff in Vermont. Shout out to Vermont. And Arizona was just there for the Innocence Project. So we really appreciate you, the work that you do. Number one, we say thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being here. And man, just thank you. And thank you for letting us know where you're at. Isabel, there's a lot of states in the building. So when we talk about mass incarceration, and we start to look at, you know, we look at these 79 million have a criminal record, right? A lot of times the people that we're working with, people think that they're unique. 79 million people that are on paper, right? You know, when we try to encourage the people that, you know, that have these criminal records, like a lot of times, how do we work with this population, 79 million? This was really powerful group of people. If we could bring us together and say, you know, you're a very powerful, we could move legislation and everything, but it's not many of us either come back and want to come back and help each other. Because see, for me, I believe this is the modern day Underground Railroad, right? So this, each and every one of you, this is, I hope that every one of you, I look at you guys as disruptors, right? We're disrupting this criminal justice system. This is why we do this work, right? There's 79 million people, right? If we can encourage them to start to help teach them how to do legislation, teach them how to show up in spaces, therefore we could have housing won't be an issue anymore. People will stop getting released without IDs. As we know, IDs is one of the most challenging things. And if you have a challenge, throw it in the chat box, because if your state's having a challenge, like IDs, transportation, housing, I know people with SO, people who have sex on the sex offender registry, people who have sex offenses. There are challenges in those. Tell us what your challenges are. We can talk about those. See, our slides is foundational, right? Let's keep moving, Stephen, and let's keep going.
We're on it.
Right? We're going to talk about this. How many people, by show of hands, virtual or not, have heard about the school to prison pipeline? This is the real thing. This is real, right? So we see this school to prison pipeline. Good. I'm seeing those hands. That means that you guys
Awesome.
are familiar. This is another area that we should be looking to disrupt, right? Let's just look at these numbers. We're talking about foster care. We're talking about how these systems, right? And I'm going to say this because I don't want to be offensive, but anybody here, if you are 200 years old, I'm probably talking about you. But if you're not 200 years old, then anybody here is not the cause of why the system is like that. But this system was designed way before any of us were born. But we do understand that racism, white supremacy, a lot of these things exist that built this system before we came here. So we understand that there are systems at play. That doesn't mean that we need to continue to subscribe to them. I see some hands up. I see Jan and I don't want to mess up Hicks's last name. So let's just go with Jan first, and then we'll keep moving. Jan, did you have a question, or were you waving high? See some
No
people
question.
saying, I think did you have a question?
No.
Just say, okay, just acknowledging that you've heard of the school to prison pipeline. Thank you. So when we look at this slide here, from school to prison, right? We talk about being expelled, and it's interesting enough. It's funny, for me as a person with lived experience, I always inject lived experience into my talks and indoor trainings and technical assistance, because I feel like it's important to make sure that I live this. I don't read out of books. I'm not reading them out of books. I'm telling you this. And interesting enough, last week my son was doing a college paper on the school to prison pipeline. So a lot of these facts and things that we were just talking about. And I have to say, as a formerly incarcerated person, when I was 19, I started my first prison bid. When my son was 19, he started his first year in college. So you think that this work is the work that you do is so important, because you can actually change the demographic. You can actually change the trajectory of families, like, by helping people make different decisions. Stephen, feel free to jump in any time, brother, but we're going to hit these points here where we talk about 40% of students being expelled from school. Of the 40% of the students expelled from school are Black and brown. We talk about Black and brown folks, right? We talk about, because we do the comparison. If you look at suburban schools versus urban schools, expelled, a lot of arrests for things that could be handled in school tend to end up in arrest, right? Where we look at here, 50% of the children in the foster care system are Black and brown, right? And then I want you guys, that you're going to get these, but I want you also to be looking and making sure you're getting this data and looking at and committing it to memory, because when somebody comes into your office, right, or you're working with this particular group of people, or you're looking around your office, or you're looking at the population of who you're serving, we need to be looking at is how this system, how did they get here, right? How did they end up here? 70% of the students involved in school arrest or referred to law enforcement are Black and Latino, right? Black and brown, right? So 3.5 times of students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended and whites. So we understand that this is early. This is before we even see prison cells. This is the beginning. This is the process. And I don't know if you knew this, and I'm going to say this, that it was interesting. I was watching a documentary not too long ago. Stephen, we should try to find out where that documentary was. But the guy that designs prisons also designs schools. And anybody ever see the correlation, the similarities to prison set, how schools, mostly inner city schools that are being built, are almost similar to how prison structures are. The only difference is there's no razor wire. Stephen, did you have something to say?
That is absolutely shocking. And the moment you said that, what I saw was hallways that are done that where you couldn't tell if you were in a penitentiary or you were in a school. The kinds of sounds, the doors. I just hadn't really connected that. But it makes a lot of sense about why there's so many similarities. And the last thing I'll just say about it is, this is odd, but the transition from school to prison would feel almost normal, because that's what you've been sort of set up to expect. It's very insidious.
Right.
And I'd love to see that documentary. I think there's more to be said here.
We got to get that link. I see Jason talks about the high school, 4 inches wide, the windows, right? 4 inches wide, and the walls were 2 inches, 2 feet thick, right? When you think about it, right? And I don't know, you guys gotta, man, those taxpayers, man, we got to go into those inner city schools, man, and you got to see what's going on. The walkie-talkies, the walking in the hallway in silence, walking on one side of the wall. See, those of us that have been incarcerated, like, you know, I mean, being a dad, having went to a middle school one day when my daughter was in trouble, and I went there, and I'm telling you, I was triggered by going into the school and seeing how similar it was actually moving to being in prison. They had the guy with the walkie-talkie, silence in the hallway, you know, the lunchroom, all this stuff, and it was so similar to having been in prison. And so this school to prison pipeline, and what Stephen, what you were going to say, I thought you was going to say this, that the transition from school to prison, man, I want you guys to hear this, is almost seamless.
Yes.
Seamless.
Yes.
Seamless, right? So those of you that work with young people, I don't know how many people work with young people, even I like to go 16 to 25 young people. If you're working with the, I don't like to say emerging. We call them emerging adults. We don't want to call them juveniles. But you work with young people, man. We gotta be giving them some more tools so they don't end up in the system. But they also need to know that there is a system, there is a trap that is set up just for them to fall into. You know, they don't build prisons. The reason why they build prisons so well, it's not for a one day, it's not for one stay. It's for you to keep coming, right?
Yeah.
Richard says something. Oh yeah, let's talk about the cafeteria. All the same. It's all the same. It's the same thing. You know, but if you go to a different school, you know, we were talking about schools, and I don't want to spend too much time. Stephen, keep me on track, because I could just go.
I will. Right? I know.
I was thinking about, you know, how fundraising, right? When you talk about fundraising, you know, I work with inner city schools, and they're super excited if they can raise $500, right? If we raise $500 at this event, right? Whereas other schools are like, you know, maybe a suburban school, you know, some dad could just get $500, or, you know, their marker is 5,000 or 50,000, or we raise 20,000. You can just see the differences of these schools, right? Some of these inner city schools don't necessarily have swimming pools and in the golf court and the golf team and so on and so forth. Whereas the inner city schools are more focused towards teaching people, you know, to work. And I actually just, you know, just structured. So we need to be looking at that. You know, I wish that my biggest wish would be that the tax dollars didn't predict how the school system was.
Yeah.
I can go more. I seen Douglas. Did you have a question, Douglas? Or were you going to say something?
No, I accidentally hit my mic. Sorry about that.
Oh, no need to be sorry. I just check it in. I want to make sure we're checking in with people. And it's here when we talk about recently released persons typically face hurdles. Many of you, how many people work with people reentering? Show of hands, virtual or physical. So you work with the returning citizens, right? So some of these hurdles you might be familiar with, vocational training, right? So the interesting thing is, depending on what state you're in and what prison facility you're coming from, right? You can basically stay on your bunk and just not do anything, do your time, and as long as you stay out of trouble, you're fine. So there's no requirement, right? But then I always talk about, I don't think we have it here, and if we do, we'll revisit it. But I always talk about CSI, right? And I know a lot of you might be thinking crime scene investigators, but what I'm talking about is communities, systems, and individuals. When you're talking about reentry and you're working with people that are cycling in and out of the system, we need to be thinking this three-legged stool, right? Communities, I'm going to say it again, communities, systems, and individuals. See, the community has its role, right? It needs to be receptive of individuals so we can give them vocational training, right? Well, we're going to talk about the vocational training or securing housing and employment. That's the community. We need to be able to have these things easily accessible for our returning citizens, right? The system has its role, right? The system, right, has to prepare people to come home. So that's where your IDs come in at, and your vocational training, right? So I'm incarcerated. I'm going into that system, right? I go into there. So you would think that I would come home with all the necessary tools to successfully reenter it back into the community, right? But if I come home with no ID, I don't have any vocational training. I've been going 10, 20 years. I've been going 5 years. I've been going 2 years. And I'm in the same position that I was before I came in. We haven't even talked about trauma yet. We haven't even talked about trauma. There's no way we can have this conversation if we're not talking about trauma. See, because if I go in traumatized and then I'm traumatized, I'm more traumatized. I get more traumatized while I'm inside with living with people, strip searches, and all those other things, and still haven't dealt with that. And then they release me. And then here we go. I'm released. Now I'm expected to secure housing and employment. We haven't addressed my mental health issues, right? Do you see what happens? Successful entry fails, right? And guess what? I mean, we've been together a little while. So can I say this? Can I say this? Y'all listening closely? Check this out. When someone fails, when they fail, they don't blame the system. They don't blame the prison system. They don't say, oh, you guys failed. This guy is going back. This gal is going back. They, them are going back. They say it was them. It was their fault. It's your fault that you went back to prison. Your fault that the recidivism rates are high. You know, there's no other business in the world that you can have a 70% failure rate and be successful and still be funded at millions and millions of dollars. Oh, I'm upsetting some people today. I don't mean to be. I'm just saying. Hey, they brought me here, man. I'm just telling y'all what it is. I see some messages down there. I just want to scroll, make sure that we're not missing something, Stephen, in the chat. Okay, we see some. Yeah. Appreciate you, Jess. So understand that. So let's just follow this map really quickly, right? Incarceration. Darren is unable to enroll in classes, right? Because he didn't have enough time or his charge didn't allow him to get there, but everybody wants to get in the wood shop, right? It's important for Darren to get some kind of trade because he never had a trade, but he didn't get it. Darren's driver's license expired while he was incarcerated, but didn't have an ID, got released from an ID. But let me tell you, when Darren's in prison, you can't go anywhere without an ID. You can't go to medical. You can't go nowhere without an ID. But when you get out, you can get out without identification. And we all know you can't do anything. You can't even pick up your medication without an ID. So it's already, we talk about slippery slope. We talk about failing, right? You can't even pick up your kid from daycare. Personal experience of mine. You can't even pick up your child from daycare or from school because you don't have the proper identification, right? Public housing restrictions. Oh yeah, you can't go there with Section 8. If you lived in government housing when you left, you probably can't go back because you got a felony conviction. Oh man, we're talking about systems. We're talking about structures. Those structures that exist for a reason, right? Now, if you own your own house, you know, I can go back there. We own our own houses. And this is, so when we're talking about these systems, we're really talking about the systems of poverty and people that don't own their own properties, that don't own their own businesses, that don't have access to resources, right? Because if my family owns a business and we own our own property, reentry is going to be easier, let's say, right? Versus somebody has to go out and rely on what? The system to provide and open these doors. I got to seek housing. I got to seek employment. Oh, wait a minute, but I got a criminal record. So employment choices are going to be slim. Housing choices are going to be slim. But then my parole officer or somebody is telling me that I need to do this. So when those of you are working with these individuals, right, you have to be figuring out what's the best way that we could provide services for these. And we can't just keep doing, man, listen, we cannot keep doing surface level work. We can't just keep, well, oh, you don't got an ID. Well, go over to this job. When you send somebody for a job, did you make sure they had the ID? Did you make sure they had a resume? Did you make sure, right, they had the tools to go? Like if it was your kid and you said, I want you to go get a job, you would make sure they had every tool in the toolbox to be successful at that job. We can't keep offering substandards. Because reason why I say this, my friends, is because then we are complicit to the system that exists, right? So let's go. Darren has a criminal record, inability to obtain a roofing license because of his conviction and lack of ID, making it difficult for him to find a job. And part of his release is you need to find a job. Well, I need to find a job, but I can't get a job because also I don't have that ID yet, or I don't have these things. You guys, by a show of hands, thumbs up. So let me know I'm talking right. I just want to make sure I'm in the right place, because sometimes I take a wrong turn. Sometimes I join the wrong room. So I just want to make sure I'm in the right space talking to the right people, right? Successful reentry fails, right? I see some thumbs. I see some people still looking at me like, I'm not really sure. I don't know. And just follow me. Just work with us. Follow us along, right? Stephen, can we go back to that slide for 1 second?
Again. Yep. There you go.
And I just want to just end with that. Successful reentry fails, right? It fails because he wasn't properly equipped, right? If I don't have the right tools, if I'm a mechanic and I don't have the right tools, I can't fix your car properly, right? I can try to wing it, but I can't fix it properly, right? Darren does not visit the health clinic upon release to its distance from where he's staying, and he does not have the medication he needs, right? So now he's not getting his medication. And we were talking about stigma a little bit. Anybody that's ever been incarcerated, right? There's a stigma that comes to those that get medication. So those that may need medication, whether it be psychiatric medication or anything, there's such a stigma within prison around medication lines and stuff. You don't even want to go get pimple cream because they will think that you're getting psychiatric medication and so on and so forth. So you'll meet a lot of people that transition out who say, I need my medication. And then when you say to them, well, how long have you been taking medication? Oh, well, I didn't take it while I was inside because I didn't want anybody to think I was crazy, right? But as soon as they get out, they want their medication. Or they were on a certain medication on the inside and it was easy to get it because medical brings you the medication. But now I don't have an ID. Now I don't have this, or I don't know how to, get this medication. So I might have diabetes or something and I need that medication and I don't have it. This is where we as a community need to come in and make sure that we're checking in with people from that welcome home. We need to be supporting people and finding out what they need upon release, right? We should already know this. And let me tell you this, and this is something that I see some thumbs up, but I want to say this is important. You guys listening? Y'all listening? Check this out. Reentry. Make sure we say this in the next meeting, office meeting, or wherever you go. Reentry begins at the beginning of the sentence. The beginning of the sentence, not the end. You can't try to help somebody put their life back together. I guess we chose this saying it. You can't help somebody put their life back together in 90 days, in 60 days, or whatever our funding programs say. Reentry begins at the beginning, because if I come into prison, if Darren comes into prison homeless, what are the chances he's going to be homeless when he gets out, right? Man, I appreciate you, Jess. Let's go, Stephen. Let's go, man. We in the car now.
Going home is hard.
Love it. So going home is hard, right? Everybody, man, let me tell you, you would think right now as we sit here, we have the luxury of being on Zoom, whether you're in your office, whether you're in your home, wherever. You got a nice background like Stephen with a fire going. I like that, brother. We need that. I like that, right? Wherever you are at, we have the luxury to do that. There is somebody right now sitting on a bunk terrified that tomorrow there's their release date and they got nowhere to go. Terrified. This going home should be an exciting thing, right? But all of a sudden now I got to figure out where I'm going to eat, what I'm going to eat. Can I go here? We always tell people you got to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and a plan D, and possibly even an E, right? Because we don't never know, what these challenges are going to be. Community reintegration assistance with lack of barred from housing, right? This is typical. Many government subsidized housing, if you have a felony conviction, especially for any type of drug possession, you're not allowed to be on the lease. So if you're not on the lease, you're actually illegally in this place, right? And then we got a population of people who are transitioning where their parents are now elderly and they live in elderly housing, which we all know is not feasible for somebody else to live there, right? So these things happen, right? And a lot of times I really appreciate what you're saying about the Department of Corrections. Everybody needs to understand these. We need to be having these conversations on a regular basis, because in order for us to create a successful bridge to reentry from the correctional system, we need to know what the challenges are. We need to understand what challenges individuals are having when they're transitioning out. It's not just releasing people. You're not just going home. We need to be able to provide, lack of employment. What are we going to do to cut down the employment thing? What are we doing to lack of transportation, right? You're just releasing people. I mean, it's sinister that we're just releasing people. Right, we're just letting them go because it's by design, right? The barriers to education. I couldn't get the treatment that I needed while I was inside. So now here I am trying to get this treatment on the outside, right? Barriers to education, cultural considerations. We talk about cultural considerations, right? So what might work for Stephen is not going to be the same thing that's going to work for me, right? So my challenges may be different. I'm going back to an urban environment. I don't have a cousin. Not saying Stephen got a cousin, Stephen. I'm not going to say you got a cousin that has a roofing business, but my cousin doesn't have a roofing business. I don't have those connections, right? So employment's going to be a little bit more challenging for me, right? And you guys might be hearing some banging because my house is built in the 1800s, so that's my heating system, or the ghost. I don't know, but work with me. So here, this slide is blurry is that slide blurry for everyone else? If you guys can see that slide, good. All right, cool. Just you, Jason. Sorry, we're gonna make sure you get that. Right. Check out Brenda's. Brenda talks about we get calls daily regarding humans being released with no home. I mean, exactly. And it's so crazy. This system, we know the systems they know where you are. They know how many people are in there. They know, it's really a really good system in the prison system, but they don't know you're getting out tomorrow. We're not calling, if I had a major surgery when I was in prison and I'm getting released tomorrow, you think they call a hospital and say, hey, Daryl had surgery yesterday. We should make sure that he's connected to the hospital or follow-up care. That's not always that's not always the case. And if your state does that, that's huge, because a lot of states, you just get released. It's more than a release date. We should just call this training, it's more than a release date, right? 91% of people released from prisons report food insecurities. We got people who have never been in prison and struggling with food insecurities, right? So imagine getting out and now where every day we hear this term, 3 hots in a cot. I know every day I'm going to have lunch. I know there's going to be lunch. There's going to be dinner and breakfast. I know that. All I do is wake up. And I'm going to get those 3 meals. All of a sudden now I get released, and all of a sudden now I need to fend for myself. I got to figure it out. I got to figure that out. And that is very hard for people to transition. Background checks for justice involved people. I've been out of incarceration for, I think 12 years now, maybe 13. And I still, the background check, still background check, still check. It doesn't matter how many countries I've spoken. Doesn't matter how many presentations I've done. They still talk about the background check. So you know what? It's like a life sentence, right? This is a life sentence. So we need to be working on that too, especially those organizations that say we love to hire, give second chances. We love to help people second chances. We love hiring justice impacted people. Oh, but we can't because you got a criminal record. Well, how are you gonna hire somebody that's justice impacted and you don't allow them to, your organization doesn't hire them with criminal record? I just want to hit that cultural considerations, because that is important. We need to acknowledge that. If your organization doesn't have somebody that may look like me or someone else, we need to be able to figure out how the best way we can service those individuals. Maybe your organization doesn't have somebody that speaks Spanish, but are you connecting with Spanish speaking organizations? Are you making sure you're bridging that gap? Or we can't just be winging it, right? A lot of times I like to talk about, I need housing, but your program only offers yoga. Yoga's nice. No, don't get in the chat box talking about yoga. I like yoga, but when I need housing, I need housing. So don't try to fix my housing issue with yoga. You know what I mean? I'll do some yoga, but I need a job. Yoga's great, but I'm hungry. Right? Y'all hear what I'm saying? Right? We can't just, put band-aids on these things. Formerly incarcerated people are twice as likely to lack high school diplomas. Absolutely. 8 times likely to complete college degrees. But sometimes some of us do. I mean, my first taste of college actually happened when I was incarcerated, but that's not everybody's story. Let's go to the next slide, brother. Oh, wait. Go back. I just want to make sure everybody's seen that slide. Can you go back once? So we're looking at this system. I love this. I love this slide, Stephen, where we talk about how it goes. Jail reentry, right? Look at all these different city government. That's where my IDs and stuff are going to come from, or licensure if I want my own business, right? Mental health services, right? If I need to talk to somebody, or if I need some treatment, employment services, I need a job. So remember, we talked about community systems and individuals, right? This is community. And then the system has its responsibility, and the individual has their responsibility, right? They need to have some skin in the game, but they need to be prepared, right? Without all 3 of those legs working together, the stool will fall, right? The stool will fall. If the system hasn't prepared the individual, chances are they're going to have a hard time and fail. If the community is not receptive, housing, if housing, employment, mental health services, the brother who took his life, unfortunately took his life, he had the house, he had the job, he had the relationship, but his mental health, he still didn't have the mental health piece fixed, right? You see what I'm saying, friends? All of this stuff. And let me tell you, this could look good. This could look good. Thank you for those who are saying I look good today. Thank you. This could look good, but the inside, right?
Yes.
That inside could be, how do we help that mental? Because see, there's a reoccurring thought that when those of us are transitioning from incarceration, that this is not all real. We dream about being home all the time. Is this a dream? Am I going to wake up one day? Am I really presenting here, or am I going to wake up in a cell and this was all a dream? This is, man, the sight. What happens to you in prison is unexplainable, right? Post-incarceration syndrome, 100%. Talk a lot about that. And community health and substance use treatment and law enforcement, right? You still have some of us that come out, we still have the responsibilities and connections to parole, probation, right? And walking, some restitution. How are we supporting those individuals and those things? Because anything in this blue circle can be overwhelming for an individual that's transitioning home and an individual that's already been home, right? He's been home. Anybody justice involved, any of these things can be overwhelming for them. So understanding that, and one of the things I always like to say, especially to professionals, is anything that you want in life, we want the same things. You want a house, you want a family, you want to feed your people, you want to take care of yourself, you want to be able to a place to shower, you want the same things. So it's not rocket science, it's not hard work. It's just, how do we think? How do I get this person? See, because it's not about surviving, right? We don't want people to just survive. We want them to thrive. That should be our goal. Thriving should be our goal. If you with me with that, give me a thumbs up. Let me know I'm talking right, talking to the right group. Stephen, let's go. Get to the next slide.
We're on it.
So when this stuff doesn't happen, my friends, when this doesn't happen, when reentry fails, right? And I love that it says when reentry fails, right? When reentry fails, because we're not talking about when the individual fails. When Daryl fails, we talk about when reentry fails, when reentry wasn't working. So when that person comes back, we need to figure out what didn't work. What did you need to be successful? Not what did you do? I'm back again. When I go into the prison system, they'd be like, what happened? Guess what happened? Guess what? I know what happened. You got locked back up. You didn't have what you needed to be successful. Yeah. Now, granted, there's some people who feel like prison is much easier. And that's shameful on us as a community. There's some people that say, you know what, jail is a lot easier, right? But that's because we didn't equip them with the proper tools. Right. Because anybody will say, in Connecticut, man, they serve fish on Fridays no matter what. Every Friday, they serve fish, and they've been serving fish for the last 50 years, and they will continue to serve fish. But every once in a while, they serve chicken on Sunday, and that is a treat. So when I go into the prisons, they be like, oh, man, they got chicken on Sunday. You know what I say? They got chicken. You can have chicken on Monday, if you go home and stay. You can have chicken every day of the week. Like, you don't gotta wait till Sunday, and guess what? You could get 2 pieces. Like, right? You could get 3 pieces, because see, in prison, that's one of the things. And if you follow me on social media, right? Don't follow me if you're on a diet. Please don't follow me on social media if you're on a diet, because I don't eat healthy. But what I would tell you is that a lot of times people say, well, why do you take pictures of your food? Why do you take pictures of your food? Because food is freedom. You don't understand that. Those of us that have lost our freedom understand that food is freedom, right? So I can go and get chicken, I can get the fish, I can get whatever I want, where I have been in situations like many of that 73 million or 79 million, right? Have been told what to eat, when to eat, how many pieces you can get. You get the small piece, this dude gets the big piece, people have made those decisions for us for so long. We had a young man get out, and some social workers picked him up. And he's a young man, he did 2 years in prison, and the social workers were so excited to pick him up. They brought him to Dunkin' Donuts, right? And I know we got some Starbucks people here, but we're only talking about Dunkin' Donuts right now, right? And they bring him into Dunkin' Donuts, and there's a ton of donuts. And they say, pick one. And the young man stands there, and he's looking, and he starts to cry. And the social workers are like, why is he crying? Maybe he doesn't like donuts. What's wrong with him? Why do you guys think in the chat box? Why do you think he cried? Why do you think he cried? Why do you think? Anybody? Why do you think he started crying? That's right, Toby. Absolutely. He had a choice. See, when you are incarcerated, yes, thank you, Jason, everybody. Yes. Let me tell you, when you go to the prison, you're removed from choices. You don't have choices anymore, right? You don't have choices. The one choice you have is try to stay alive, try to stay sane. Those are the choices you get. Try to stay out of the way, right? But he had choices. Somebody gave him a choice now. All of a sudden, he had choices. When they give out rare reasons that they give out donuts, and they're usually stale, no disrespect to DOC, but whatever, right? They always give you one donut, and then you don't get to pick. It's usually some donut somebody threw on your tray. You don't get to pick. And I know to some people that might be a small thing, but that was a huge thing to him, because now he realized he had to start making choices again. Man, thank you for everybody saying that. I just want to hit these. When reentry fails, more crimes, more victims, more pressure on the unburdened budget, right? These are all like system issues, more crime, right? More victims, more pressure on the budget, right? But we just talked for a minute about the individual, right? These are system issues, right? More family distress, more community instability. These all could be aligned with the individual as well. Without mass incarceration, 5 million fewer people would have been poor from 1980. Did you guys see that? Did you see that? Without mass incarceration, 5 million fewer people would be poor, right? Because they would have had opportunities to work on their lives and build their life structure. So because every time you go to prison, you have to start over. You start from scratch. It's like they're putting you back at the start line, right? If we think about Monopoly or any other games, Trouble or whatever, you start back at square one. And every time you get arrested and every time you're in the system, you start back at square one, right? And people, that's like even myself, and I'm sure Stephen could attest to this, and any other, I don't even know if you did a check-in. How many formerly incarcerated people, if your boss is watching and they don't know, don't jump in. You don't got to jump in. But if you're proud to say you're formerly incarcerated, let us know you're in the building. Let us see your hand, because we're proud today. We are here. We are here. We are here. Appreciate you. Understanding that and then Southern drug overdose is a leading cause of death after release. In Connecticut, and I'll just say this, and Stephen, keep me on track, brother. But one of the things is that in Connecticut, 67% of our overdose deaths had a criminal record, had a prison number. 67%, right? So definitely this work needs to be done from the inside. It is an inside job. Inside, right? That's why reentry begins at the beginning of the sentence and not the end, because we need to tell people about fentanyl. If you've been inside for so long and you've been doing whatever, you don't understand about fentanyl. You don't understand about these drugs out here. You know, everybody, I don't know about you guys, but now everybody wants a marijuana card. I need a marijuana card. And legit, some people definitely need them, but everybody wants them. But what we don't tell them inside about the marijuana card, you can get the marijuana card for $150 or whatever it costs you to get it, but it may prevent you from getting that job. It may prevent you from getting the forklift job. It may prevent you from getting the CDL. Just because you got a marijuana card doesn't mean that that's going to allow you to get the position that you need to take care of yourself and or your family. Are we having those conversations with brothers and sisters while they're inside? Right? Because everybody hears, oh, they got marijuana, it's legal. Okay, yeah, alcohol is too. But that doesn't mean that we go out and jump right into that, especially if you're a person like me who's in long-term recovery, having used a substance since May 7, 2007. I mean, I was a fan of marijuana, but I know that that will lead to so much more. And my next presentation will be in a correctional facility if I pick up any drink or drug. So I know better. So how are we equipping with individuals to make sure that they understand that as well? You know, because as for me, I am fearful. Stephen, are you in? Is it up for you?
I am. And listen, you know, so I'm gonna shift gears and we're gonna talk about trauma, because almost everything that we have talked about to this point is undergirded by the impact of trauma. And I've seen that all the way through in the chat comments. There is a detention officer that is in this chat. And it's one of the, and I no disrespect, but it's one of the few detention officers that I've seen who has a, you know, what, at least from the chat, a pretty firm grasp on what is happening, you know, certainly at the jail level. And that's really encouraging. The other thing I want to share, and you know, this is directed to everybody, but you know, also to the detention officer, is I'm doing a training called Trauma-Informed Corrections Care, as you see, but it's specific for detention deputies. And the reason that we, you know, I kind of came at it this way is because, and Daryl kind of touched on this, we have for a long time focused on the inmates, and we've looked at often the corrections team as, you know, more sort of perpetrators of the trauma that's, you know, that's heaped upon the shoulders of the, you know, the inmates. But the truth is that the corrections team has a ton of trauma, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we move forward. And it's really important that we understand that when you bring two different trauma survivors together, one with a serious power differential, any detention deputy has incredible power over an inmate. You know, it may not feel like that, but certainly to an inmate, oh yes, it absolutely feels like that. And as we're going to find out as we talk about this in, you know, we go a little bit deeper, the moment that we have any confrontation between the two, inmate asking for something that ain't gonna fly, a detention deputy that telling somebody this is what you need to do, and you know, getting a bit of resistance, the moment that that happens, what you now have are two trauma activated individuals. And for both of them, the grown up in the front of the head has gone. And so now you have two people that are basically running on emotion. And we all know what happens when you bring especially men together who have trauma histories and who are getting a little heated. Men don't get to show many emotions beyond rage, and we're pretty darn good at rage. So let's talk a little bit more about trauma because it does undergird almost everything that we're seeing and that we're experiencing within the correction system as it relates to how we're going to support inmates and people who are reentering. Without our understanding of this, we're sending folks out, as Daryl said earlier, totally unprepared. Totally unprepared. They don't need to have a deep level of trauma understanding. We need that. We need that far more so than the inmates do. We'll get that to the folks who are down. But it's really important for those of us who provide our services, our custody and control, our access to recovery supports. We're the ones who need to understand this, because we're the ones who will be able to make decisions based on what we understand about trauma. So here's what I mean by all this. When we talk about trauma, it is really, there's two different kinds. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but what we're talking about here is that when you have a circumstance, an event that feels outside your ability to control, that is so seriously threatening to you that your life could potentially be in jeopardy. Think about that from an inmate's perspective. And you really believe that whatever's going to happen is going to be harmful, probably life-threatening. When that happens, the activation for trauma is right there. You can't stop that. I always relate to it as it just feels like something ticked inside of me. And my family will tell you, when we see him get Popeye arms, that's when we get worried. And it's because I'm responding in a way that I know today what's happening, but I certainly didn't know it 5-10 years ago. And 20 years ago, when I was, 25 years ago, when I was in and out of the system, I had no idea, but I realized everybody was trauma triggered, everybody. And what we have to understand is when this happens, you can see there's a loss of self-worth. There's a loss of the sense of self. There's a loss to, being connected to your own body. You can disassociate, just off you go and into, sort of dreamland, la la land, as some folks call it. There's a loss of intimacy. It's really hard to trust anyone with a trauma history. Tons of shame and guilt. We can't really recognize danger cues anymore because everything's dangerous. All things are dangerous to us now. So when we talk about trauma, think of this more as a set of guidelines. There's not a specific definition for trauma. And I don't think there could be. So when you are understanding, absolutely, Michelle, yes, a lot of trauma. And I want to just push this out to the folks who are operating within corrections, particularly the folks who have direct care of, the folks that you're supervising. Listen, you all have really gotten a bad rap. And when we understand what is happening to you, as you hear stories, as you write incident reports, as you deal with critical incident, discussions, all of these things, you are collecting secondary trauma. And we'll talk about that in 1 second. What I need you to understand right now, we don't have to dive really deeply into brain structure, but what I want you to understand is that when that tick happens and you become activated, whether you're a CO, an inmate, a family member, it doesn't matter. What happens is that amygdala dumps all of the chemicals that are the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response that we have. When the amygdala dumps those chemicals in, that prefrontal cortex, that's where the adult in the head lives, that adult exits. And now all you have, and I said this earlier, are those emotions. So just think about, at the time you need a rational, calm adult to take over, that rational, calm adult is gone in both of you. And it, for many folks who don't have extensive trauma histories, that calms down 30 minutes, maybe an hour. For people with trauma history, the button gets stuck. The button is stuck on, and it lasts 2-3 days. And when people are operating in that time frame, they are operating in what's called hypervigilance. And basically, they are on guard. They are ready to act in terms of fight or flight. And it takes a while for that to calm down. While that's happening, anything can be a trigger. Anything can activate a person. And truth is, as a trauma survivor myself, I'd go looking for things to get this out of me, because that intensity of fight or flight that is just hanging on you for days is a lot. It's an awful lot to carry around. It's also why people tend to be a little bit more likely to get violent really quickly. That trauma is just holding them, and it's really, really difficult to pull yourself away from that. In fact, it's darn near impossible without time. The reason I mentioned secondary trauma as something that happens to a lot of the corrections team is because the folks that we're supervising, and I was certainly one of them, we likely have some complex trauma histories. We probably have some childhood trauma stuff. And this isn't my dad was mean to me and it's all his fault. No, we're responsible for every single thing we did. There's no doubt about that. But as we learn more about trauma, what we can give ourselves a little bit of relief around is that because we've had a brain change, some of this isn't our fault. And by that, I mean, exactly, Richard, they do get reinforced. Those pathways get fixed, they get reinforced, and they change your worldview. So when we talk about secondary trauma, what we're talking about is you, corrections team members, hearing things that you would hear in a penitentiary, hearing about somebody who was stabbed. I remember I did my reception in San Quentin, and one of the guys in reception had been busted for rape. When he was housed in our reception, it took him 3 days. Somebody went to his cell. When they opened the doors for the shower, they threw some, a chemical on him and lit him on fire and burned him to death. That stuff happens, right? That was 3 cells away. I smelled that man for days. And, talk about trauma. That doesn't have to happen to somebody. It just needs a CO to wheel that body out like they did. And trust me when I say that's traumatic. So when you listen to or you learn about distressing things, when you care for people who, have been attacked or, have some bad physical injuries from something that happened, when you've heard stories about people and the things that they've done, that trauma collects in you. It doesn't go away. And if you happen to be a person who, like most of us, we got a little bit more compassion, a little bit more empathy, that's why we're kind of doing this work, or at even higher risk of absorbing this trauma. It is real, and it impacts all of us in ways that are very difficult for us to identify individually. But as you can see here, how trauma does impact the client engagement. Just think about this as the person on probation or parole coming in to see you, or, somebody who's, got a job in the watch office and, he or she's been stealing paper clips or whatever it may be and gets caught. That kinds of stuff happens. And Jen has a comment here in the chat. I just want to quickly mention. It's not just exposure to secondary trauma. in police officers, the thing that most predicts them developing PTSD isn't necessarily being exposed to the trauma, but how their police department treats them. Now, let me just be something, I want to get real clear, because what Jen is talking about here is the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout. And we use those terms interchangeably a lot, but here's the difference. And this is how it's real easy once you hear this to separate the two. When you have job related challenges, my pay stinks, supervision usually they're just there to yell at me. My vacation always gets screwed up. Those kinds of job related things aren't necessarily related to trauma. They're related to burnout. And you are feeling now like not even interested in going into that work. Compassion fatigue, the secondary trauma, typically comes on. Usually it hits you towards the end of the day, and you just can't hear one more story. You're done. And that used to happen to me when I was a veteran services coordinator. About 3 o'clock, my tank was full. I couldn't take in anything else. But the next day, I was totally good to go. And away we went. That's the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. And both of them will send you out of your job and into something else, whether that is a new job or, a spiral into substance misuse or whatever it may be. It's certainly possible that will happen. So when we think about how it's going to impact the folks we serve, and when I say that, I'm not just talking about inmates or the parolee or the people we're supervising. I'm talking about our colleagues, because this happens through all of us. It's not just focused on people who we're supervising. And so you'll see people just avoid situations because they aren't heard. That happens a lot in work where it's real hierarchical. You have a standard operating protocols, and this is how you do things. And we don't, it's always been done this way. This is how we're going to do it. We don't want to put trust in other people. And in a corrections environment, that's probably pretty darn smart. Comfortable with transactional analysis. I can use myself. I could not understand. And I've been in recovery 23 years now, and I have an opioid use disorder. I use medication-assisted treatment. I have all of those things. I could not understand, still can't, how people want to be my friend when I don't have any good dope to sell them. I can't understand it. And that's that more comfortable with transactional relationships, because I still feel worthless to most people if I don't have something that I can give them. Difficulty following through with appointments, referrals. Come on, you guys, I know that you all know this. And it's because there are other things. Daryl mentioned this earlier. We can do yoga, but I need lunch. Yep, that's exactly right. And sometimes we make the choices. I'm going to eat today and I'll get to that appointment next week. I got to go do what I got to do today. That loss of hope and dignity. Yep. I mean, all of us who have, any trauma history can understand what that vicious cycle is. You get the shame and the guilt. A lot of us will use to get beyond that. Then when we come down, we have more shame and guilt, and we use more to get beyond it. You already get the cycle. So the way we can come at people and re-traumatize them, this is really hard in a criminal justice setting because these are the things that happen. A lack of privacy. I'll never forget when I got into I had a privileged dorm status, and there was a door that I could close, couldn't lock it, but I could close it and I could take a dump in private. And if you don't know what greatness it is to be able to use the bathroom by yourself again, I can't tell you how important and amazing that was. The unwanted touching, that stuff happens, embarrassing or distressing questions. you get asked that stuff in front of 50 other people. Usually you're buck naked when they ask you. The expert versus partnering, that's when we're telling people we know what's best for you. We're the experts. Only one right way, a 12-step abstinence only approach for an opioid use disorder. When you leave, you go right to a meeting. What they need is to go right to a doctor and get placed on medication, whether that's medication assisted treatment, whether it's mental health meds, whether it's all of the above. We need to get them at the gate. We can't allow the dealer to pick the person up at the gate and give them the first one free, because once that happens, it's on. Staff bias and that unresolved trauma, the institutional inequities, all of those things just conspire, makes the person feel less than, and it leaves the staff feeling like there's just, what's the point of us doing it? They're always coming back. Are we making any difference at all? And then, those rigid policies and procedures. Again, I don't know how you can get beyond those kinds of things in a corrections environment, but there are ways that we can come at the engagement with people that is trauma informed. It's not going to be the kind of trauma informed that you're going to see in a peer run, trauma informed, strengths based organization, because it can't be. But what we can do is help the detention officers, the criminal justice staff understand why their people are acting the way they are, what to look for, and how to sort of de-escalate this without becoming weak and appearing weak to your colleagues or to the folks that you're supervising. We can't have that, but we can have folks who understand and bring a little bit of compassion to the table. All right, with that, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to turn this back over to Dee.
Hey, Steve, just real quick. I mean to interrupt, but I wanted to point out where Jess talks about the us versus them, right? And that is right in along with the staff bias, right? So there's that us against them. And, Ali reminded me about this tree where those that see me present in other spaces, this tree is so familiar because if you look at these root core issues, right? If you look at the roots where we got primary care, support groups, all these different things, poverty, right? Loss, disaster, these root core issues of trauma. But when you look up, look what grows out of it. You see pain, nightmare, and this comes from both sides, right? Whether it be custody staff and or people incarcerated folks, right? So we have this thing that's going on. And I love the brain, where you're talking about the brain and understanding how the hippocampus, right? We didn't talk about that. And those of you that are watching this training, man, make sure you reach out to MHTC, right? And let them know that this is an all day. We can do all day. This right here is so important, especially from the secondary trauma issue, how it affects not only staff, but custody, and we can see how to cross the lines where we can see the conflicts happen. That's when we really starting to unpack this work. Keep going, brother. I just want to get that out.
It's going back to you, brother, because I know we've talked about post-incarceration syndrome already.
Yes.
Take it away, my friend.
Yes, we definitely talked about this, and I know we only have a little bit of time, so we're going to try to breeze through this. But like I said, this is an all-day training, so make sure you reach out to the team and say, listen, we want to see this all day because we can really unpack this in a few hours, right? We can really get to the meat. This is just, if you go to the mall and they have that guy holding the tray of meat and they give you a little taste of it, this is just a little taste of it. But you really need, tell them you want the whole tray. You want to take this in because this is important. And this is where reentry, recovery, all of this meets, because when we start to understand populations, we understand who we're working with, and when I say working with, I also mean your colleagues, because we all bring this bias to work. We all bring this thing, and at the end of the day, we all want to go home. No matter what part of the role you play within the system, we all want to go home, right? So post-incarceration syndrome, institutional personality traits, right? Institutionalized personality traits, right? So I got to have that ice grill. I got to have that way because see, it's, you can't be all smiley and friendly in jail. It's not camp, right? So there's a way that you keep yourself protected. So, right, so we got these institutional, like, right? So I am personally, I will say here, I am still institutionalized, right? So understanding that, you know, I needed a structured environment. I'm gonna say that again. I needed a structured environment in order to function, right? So in corrections and in the systems, they teach you structure. How do we transition that structure to the community? That's the art. And you got to come back, make sure that we have that conversation. Feel free to reach out to me. We can really talk about how you structure for individuals that are institutionalized like myself and many others that transition out and haven't figured out how to transition from one place to another. See, because when you're institutionalized, once I get in the prison system, I am a model inmate. You guys see it. You see people model prisoners, but then when you read their jacket or you read what they did, you're like, how is this possible? Or you see them come back cycling in and out of the system. You're like, but you were so good. You did so well in here because, see, it was structured, right? You need to teach me how to structure my environment on the outside and I will be successful. And we got the tips to that. Post-traumatic stress disorder, you already know PTSD is. I'm seeing stuff happen in the world. I see it happen inside. And this is that undealt with trauma that, you know, and one of the things I love that you talked about, brother, is that people need to understand you do not have to be the person that's experiencing the traumatic event. You can witness it. And that's what many of us witnessed George Floyd, unfortunately, be murdered on TV because we're all home during COVID, right? We witnessed it. Different people experience different trauma in different ways. Me and my brother lived in the same house, but his trauma story is going to be a lot different than mine. And that's another conversation that we need to be having. So we all can experience it, but it's how we respond to it. How do we handle it? How do we handle the trauma, right? Antisocial personality traits. This is huge, right? So I've been in prison. I haven't been around people. I've been locked down 23-1. Right now I get out and you want me to go to your men's program. You want me to go to AA. You want me to go to anger management. And now you want me to be in this room with all these people. Whoa, I can't do that. And now what? If I'm in your program, I appear to be what? Antisocial. I'm antisocial. I got this antisocial thing. And now they got this really cute word they like to call you non-compliant. But see, I'm not non-compliant. I just haven't been around people. I don't really know how to function in those situations. So you got to understand that we need to transition people properly in order for them to be able to be a part of the group and participate in groups. If I haven't been in groups and then all of a sudden I come out and you want me to be in this group, then nah, I'm probably not gonna go to that group. I'd rather go back. I'm not doing that, right? Social sensory deprivation syndrome, right? If anybody knows about solitary confinement or that 23-1, really lack of human contact, right? I only been around one or two people and then I get transitioned home. I've been in segregation or in ADSEG, right? Administrative segregation for the last 6 months to a year, maybe 5 years. And then they release me. They don't call home and tell my mother he's been in a box. He hasn't had human contact in the last 2 years. They don't call home and tell you that. So what happens is now I get out and now everybody thinks I'm weird. I'm not weird. I just haven't had human contact. So it might take me a little time to readjust back into the community. This is my spot, man. This is where we need to understand that for people that are transitioning. Or even if they're in that lower, for my COs and people that stop people. If I've been in a level 4 all this time and then I get to a level 2 or 3, I might have all these things playing out and you may see them, but if you don't know how to identify them to help that individual transition, they're not going to be ready, especially if you work in a pre-release. We need to be preparing those pre-release people to go home because guess what? Your people are in the community, my people. I want to make sure we're not responsible for how somebody goes in, but every one of us should be care about how they come home. Man, let's go, brother. I know we got a little bit of time left. What else you got for me?
We do. D, I want to play that video, the circle
Oh,
video.
man, you don't want to do that. Oh, man, y'all not ready for that. Oh, man, you guys are in trouble. Let's go. Let's hit that.
Let's get you there.
That's the best part. Let's get there.
Here we go. Here we go.
Back it up one more. I just saw
one more. There it is. Let me see if I can get it.
This is exactly what we're talking about. This will wrap us up.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? Yeah! While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
I'm so good. Good to see you. How are you? Amen. Noel, good to see you, honey. Welcome. I was abused as a young girl. I was beaten by my mother. I was verbally abused by my mother. I was sexually abused by another man. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a rageaholic. I've driven drunk. I've sold drugs. I was a juvenile delinquent. Probably my story is similar to most of your stories in here. I'm white and I'm female and nothing happened to me. So, I got a get out of jail free card. And so I'm here now because I see myself in every one of you.
I'm a traumatized child, raised by a traumatized child. My mother was traumatized as well as her parents.
Like he said, we wasn't born in the world of being evil people. My mother didn't want me. She hid her pregnancy. She tried to flush me down the toilet. But as I learned about these things, I always asked myself what was wrong with me.
When I come to the circle and I see everybody else and she's reading off the questions and people stepping in further, and I look at my childhood and I'm like, a lot of these people in this yard are just like me.
There was one step I should have taken that I didn't take, and I saw some of my brothers and my friends take that step, and I felt like such a coward. I wasn't brave enough to be there with them when they took that step. And every round after that, I took the most difficult step.
Our traumas kept us separated. We were all on the circumference, all standing apart. But once we began to acknowledge our traumas publicly, it brought us all closer together.
In prison, you're not supposed to show your weaknesses in prison, though. But to want to do that, to walk in that circle like that, and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have humanity and we worthy to be loved, though. Most people on the outside don't understand that we want to change so we can re-enter society better than what we left it.
And I think one of the things that when you was yelling at no shame and you had us yelling it out, it was freeing us too. And it was a point to where when I was looking at that and we was all looking at it in a circle, you can hear that echo, no shame. And that was very powerful, especially coming from a little lady like you.
I'm 76 years old. I've seen a lot. I don't like talking. I like to meet people that understand what's happening without words, and you one of them. Today has been one of the best days I had in my whole entire life. life since I've been locked up these 40 years.
So folks, listen, there's some other stuff here. Man, it's really hard for me to watch it. Every time I watch it, I remember. That's why they're all my brothers and my sisters. So we're going to be back on Wednesday. We're going to talk about drug courts. I'm going to have another gentleman who's been recently released and been through drug court and started a recovery pod at the Flagler County, Florida jail. And then on Friday, we're going to come back and I've got a colleague, a woman, a Latina woman who's got a history of penitentiary life, and she's going to come in and talk a little bit about the unique needs of women, particularly on reentry. Let me thank Daryl just for coming in and getting here. That's the person always to kick these kinds of things off, brother. Thank you for your sharing.
Okay. Thank you, bro.
Thank you for the information and the story on why you were in a suit today. Folks, I'm grateful. We will get these slides out to everybody. There's a couple of resources that Isabel Kai will make sure gets in your hand. And hopefully I'll see some of you on Wednesday and some of you on Friday. And I hope you got something out of this today. It's a labor of love for Daryl and me both.
Absolutely. Just thank us all. Thank you all. I mean, there's some parts that we didn't get to hit today, like person center, but like I said, always ask us for more. This is work that we love to do. So we love to be in your space doing this work. So understand that we need, those of you who said that we need to be in correctional facilities, make the ask, because if you don't know what you don't know. Right. So this was an hour. We put a lot into this hour, but we got so much material that we think that we know that is valuable, has helped people all over the country, for those of us that are locked up and those that work with our justice involved people. So once again, I just want to thank you, and man, brother, it's always an opportunity, always a pleasure to present with you. Isabel Kai, killing it in the back of the office. Appreciate you, and looking forward to the next one. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, guys. Happy Monday, and thanks for coming today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.